Amara Johnson woke before dawn each day, long before the sky turned pink. The single mother lived in a crowded apartment building that smelled faintly of old paint and cooking oil. Her small home, shared with her toddler daughter Lila, was cluttered, with the things a young family collected: a worn-out rocking chair, a chipped dining table, and a heap of hand-me-down toys. Each morning, Amara felt the weight of her world pressed down on her chest. Despite her fatigue, she rose quietly so as not to wake her daughter too soon. She tiptoed past Lila's crib, where the baby had slept through much of the night. Sometimes, during the most difficult nights, Lila cried until her mother's arms ached. But on this morning at least, the baby slept peacefully, curled in a small blanket that Amara had patched herself. Amara dressed Lila in a soft cotton onesie stained with spots from previous feedings. She brushed the baby's fine hair with a gentle hand, then placed her in a second-hand stroller with a faded cartoon print. The stroller's wheels rattled against the uneven apartment floor as Amara steadied herself for the day ahead. In the dim light, she prayed that they would find enough money to pay rent before the month ended. She prayed that Lila would have enough formula and diapers, and she prayed that, somehow, she could find a path out of this life where every cent felt borrowed and every hour felt borrowed too. By 6:30, Amara locked their apartment door and eased the stroller down the narrow hallway. The building's walls were thin, and every footstep or muffled conversation could be heard between floors. Even so, Amara had grown used to this. She stepped onto the cracked sidewalk outside, balancing the weight of Lila's bag, filled with diapers, an extra onesie, and a barely functioning baby monitor across her shoulder. She glanced at the sky, which was still pale with early light. The summer air was warm already, and sweat beaded on her forehead as she navigated past noisy neighbors heading to the city's heart. Amara walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, where a handful of other early commuters waited under a flickering street lamp. Some held coffee cups, others clutched backpacks that likely contained lunches and work clothes. Amara kept Lila close to her chest, soothing the baby with soft coos when she started to fuss. Between shifts, Amara sometimes worried that the baby would catch a cold from the open window of the bus. The seats were torn and the air conditioning rattled on its last legs. But the bus was their only real option to reach the city center, where Amara cleaned office buildings for $15 an hour. Even though the job did not pay much, it was reliable enough to keep food on the table and lights turned on. Inside the bus, Amara found a cramped seat next to a window. She tucked Lila into her lap and pulled out a small bottle. The baby sucked hungrily as Amara watched the world pass by. Cobblestone streets giving way to storefronts painted in bright colors, a convenience store with a chirping neon sign, and men in business suits hurrying along the sidewalk. The contrast between her life and theirs sometimes felt unbearable. She had not always dreamed of working 3 jobs and struggling to pay rent. Once she had believed that finishing high school would be enough to guarantee a stable life. But family troubles had led her to leave school early. Her mother had grown ill, and Amara had become the caretaker for her younger siblings. By her 19th birthday, she was a mother herself. As the bus rumbled through the city, Amara peered out at tall buildings reflecting the rising sun. She felt a mix of exhaustion and determination, knowing she had no choice but to keep going. She never let the weariness show in front of Lila, but inside her mind raced with worry. Could she afford groceries this week? Would the landlord demand extra money? What if Lila got sick? The questions never ended. Still, Amara held a steady hope in her heart. With enough work and careful saving, she could someday move to a slightly safer neighborhood where a mother and daughter could sleep without fearing the building might flood during heavy rain. Meanwhile, somewhere inside one of those glossy towers, Nathaniel Rhodes was beginning his own day. As the founder and CEO of a thriving technology company, he woke in a quiet, spacious home on the city's north side. The house sat behind an iron gate, guarded by shrubs that looked manicured even at sunrise. Inside, Nathaniel's morning routine was precise. He dressed in a crisp suit, made fresh coffee in a high-end espresso machine, and reviewed the day's schedule on a tablet. His home office overlooked a garden with tulips and roses that a professional landscaper tended. To Nathaniel, this life was normal, the result of years of hard work in college and early investments in startups. Nathaniel had not always had so, Much. He'd grown up in a comfortable household, yes, but his parents were often distant. They focused on business trips and charity board meetings more than on family dinners. When Nathaniel was a child, he sometimes walked home from school alone, past locked gates and silent driveways where car engines never idled. He learned to entertain himself with video games and books, filling his imagination with possibilities of what he might build when he grew up. By the time he was in high school, he had already started coding simple programs on his family computer. At 17, he built a small app that helped students find tutors. The app gained attention, and by the time he graduated, a local entrepreneur offered him seed money to develop it further. Over the next decade, Nathaniel poured his life into his work. Long hours and careful choices brought him success, but also solitude. He had a few friends he trusted, but romance had never held his interest long. He was married once briefly, but the pressures of his career made it impossible to balance a family life. After the divorce, he focused even more on his company. He believed that if he created something great for the world, the rest might fall into place. His company grew from a handful of employees to hundreds. He bought that North Side home and traveled for conferences, always staying just on the edge of burnout. On this day, his schedule was full. A board meeting at 9, a product, launch presentation at 11, and a lunch meeting with a potential investor at 1. His assistant, always efficient, wrote notes in a leather-bound planner while he spoke. Everything about Nathaniel's day felt planned out, down to the last minute. Yet, he never knew what might happen on a crowded bus at 7 in the morning, on the other side of town. Back on the bus, Amara's shift began at 8. She worked for a cleaning service that maintained high-profile office buildings in the city's financial district. By 7:45, she had dropped Lila off at a small, informal daycare run by a neighbor. The neighbor's apartment smelled of homemade bread, and her soft voice drew even the youngest toddlers into calm play. Although the cost cut deep into Amara's meager earnings, she felt relief knowing Lila was safe for those few hours. With a final kiss on Lila's forehead, Amara traded the stroller for a set of cleaning supplies, a mop bucket, a stack of microfiber cloths, and a bottle of industrial cleaner that smelled sharply of bleach. Walking through the revolving doors of the glassy office tower, Amara felt the cool blast of air conditioning and smelled the faint scent of fresh paint in the lobby. The floors above were silent when she arrived, hallways empty, lights off. She started on the 12th floor, wiping down desks, replacing trash bags, and vacuuming plush carpets. Each task reminded her of how far she had come, even if it still felt far from where she wanted to be. She thought about her mother's health, and how it steadied her to imagine a time when she would no longer struggle to pay for medicine or formula. Meanwhile, Nathaniel sat in his corner office on the 20th floor of a different skyscraper. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he scanned the city below, noting that the streets were already busy with people heading to work. He sipped his espresso, thinking through his product roadmap and the investor meeting in a few hours. On the surface, nothing seemed to connect him to a young mother in worn shoes on a bus headed for a cleaning job. Yet, their lives were about to intersect, entirely by chance. Amara wiped the last streak of dust from a conference table, watching her reflection blur in the glossy surface. She wondered where the morning had gone and how quickly the hours vanished when she was busy. She felt a flicker of something beyond mere survival, a dream of becoming a writer, of sharing her story so that others might know a life like hers. But those dreams often faded before she reached home, exhausted with her paycheck just enough to cover rent and food. Still, she held on to that spark, believing that something or someone might change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. As the morning sun climbed higher, both Amara and Nathaniel moved through their routines, one wiping desks, the other reviewing financial forecasts, unaware of how close they were to the moment when their worlds would collide. In a city of millions, their paths had seemed destined never to cross. Yet on this day, as Amara's tired eyes sank into sleep on a crowded bus and Nathaniel's hand steadied the handlebar beside her, both were on the brink of an encounter neither could have foreseen. Amara sat stiffly on the crowded train, clutching Lila close to her chest. The carriage swayed lightly as it moved, and the early morning sun cast long, gentle rays through the windows. She tried to rock her daughter to sleep, but the baby's small body was restless. Her eyelids had begun to droop from exhaustion, and she fought to stay awake. Amara thought of her mother's stoic face, worn by illness, and she whispered encouragement to herself. Keep going. Just a little longer. Each bump of the train jolted her, and she tightened her hold on Lila's tiny hand. Across the aisle, a man in a sharp suit boarded the train with a measured, confident stride. His polished shoes tapped lightly against the floor as he scanned for a seat. When he found a spot beside Amara, he nodded curtly at her and squeezed past, settling in with his briefcase on his lap. He seemed calm and practiced, as though he took this route every day. Amara noticed his crisp tie and pressed jacket and wondered what his life might be like, so different from hers. She dared not look too long. She did not want him to think. She was staring. The man was Nathaniel Rhodes, and the morning was his. He had left his large house on the north side of the city just before dawn. In that house, everything waited for him. Fresh coffee steaming in a mug, a tablet open to his day's schedule, and an assistant's neat handwriting on a pad of paper. Today, he would meet with his leadership team to discuss new software designs, and then head to a high-rise building for a product demonstration. This train ride was merely the beginning of another busy day. In contrast, Amara's morning felt like an uphill climb. She had fed Lila at home before leaving, but knew the baby might need another bottle soon. The small bottle she carried offered only a few more ounces of formula, and she worried they would run out before the end of the day. She glanced down at Lila's face, noticing the slight puckering of her lips as she fought sleep. Amara's arms ached from holding her daughter. For so long without rest, she inhaled deeply, determined not to let her weariness show. As the train rattled over the tracks, Amara closed her eyes just briefly, hoping the movement would calm Lila. The baby's breathing grew softer, and her tiny fists relaxed. Amara felt the weight of her own exhaustion finally press her eyelids closed. The world around her seemed to slow, and she surrendered to a moment of rest. Her head bobbed gently until it found support against the stranger's shoulder. She did not mean to lean on him, but she was so tired that her body could not hold itself upright any longer. Nathaniel felt the pressure of someone leaning against him before he fully realized what was happening. He looked down and saw a young mother fast asleep, her dark hair brushing the lapel of his jacket. In her arms, a small baby rested, oblivious to the crowded train. For a heartbeat, he considered waking her, but something in her peaceful face made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the way her body folded around her daughter, as though she were sheltering her from the world. Nathaniel took a breath and settled back, carefully positioning his briefcase so that neither mother nor child would slip. Amara remained still for several minutes, her breathing slow and even. She dreamed of a quiet room filled with light, where she and Lila could rest without worry. In that dream, her mother was well and her younger siblings were playing in the yard of a small house she could easily afford. She smiled in her sleep, clutching at that possibility. Meanwhile, Nathaniel watched her with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. He had never been comfortable with unexpected closeness to strangers, but he could not bring himself to push her away. The train moved into a dimly lit tunnel, and the rattling sound changed to a steady hum. The few passengers who remained seated stared at their phones or out the windows, avoiding eye contact with their fellow travelers. The man and woman seated a few rows ahead whispered in low voices about a delayed meeting. Nearby, a teenager, with earbuds, bobbed her head to music the rest of the world could not hear. In this shared space, everyone felt separate, cocooned in their own concerns. Only Amara and Rhodes had a connection, however accidental. As the train approached the next station, the lights brightened and shadows retreated. Amara stirred, shifting Lila so that the baby's head rested on her shoulder. The movement jolted Amara awake. Her eyes fluttered open, and she realized she was leaning against a stranger. Panic rose in her chest as she straightened herself. Quickly, she scanned the carriage for a moment, blinking at the sudden brightness. Lila's eyes opened too, and she whimpered softly, sensing her mother's alarm. Amara pulled the baby close, smoothing a hand over her arm. "Excuse me?" Amara whispered, murmuring an apology to the man beside her. "I'm so sorry." She brushed a lock of hair from her face and looked up. The stranger's expression was unreadable. His dark eyes held a calm patience as he offered a small, reassuring nod. Despite her embarrassment, Amara noticed the crease between his eyebrows, as if he cared about her worry more than he wanted to show. "You're okay?" he said quietly, his voice deeper than she expected. "Your daughter is safe." He pointed at Lila, whose small fingers circled Amara's shirt. Amara's heart eased a little at the kindness in his tone. She managed a small smile, though she felt cheeks burning. She scanned her body, checking her clothes for stains or wrinkles. She felt disheveled, her uniform shirt rumpled and her hair messy from sleep. Rhodes reached into his briefcase and closed it gently, as if deciding something. He pulled out a white envelope and extended it toward Amara without a word. His fingers tapped lightly against the paper. Inside, she could feel something solid. Amara hesitated, glancing from the envelope to the man's face. He raised an eyebrow and offered a slight smile, an invitation for her to accept. She took it with trembling fingers. Carefully, Amara unfolded the envelope. Her eyes widened when she saw neat, crisp bills inside. She counted quickly. $200. Beneath the money lay a transit card, loaded for what looked like several weeks of rides. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the man, searching for any hint of prank or trick. He shook his head slowly, as if reading her thoughts. "It's for you and your child," he said. "Use it for rent or childcare, or whatever you need most." His voice was soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. Amara could hardly speak. She glanced at the envelope again, then at R.H.O.'s. His expression held no judgment, only empathy. She swallowed hard, tears of gratitude stinging her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, folding the envelope carefully. "Thank you." Her voice cracked under the weight of emotion. She touched her chest as though she could feel her heart. The baby, sensing the shift, nestled closer to her mother. Lila's small fingers curled around Amara's shirt, as though the baby understood that something important had happened. Rhodes gave a gentle nod and stood as the train slowed. "Take care," he said before stepping toward the door. The closing noise of the train distracted Amara for a moment, and when she looked up again, the man was already stepping off onto the platform. She called out, "Sir, wait." But the doors slid shut. She pressed her face against the glass, watching him disappear into the crowd of morning commuters. A few passengers glanced at her with curiosity, but she only saw a blurred figure in a suit fading into the brightness of the station. The train lurched forward, carrying Amara and Lila toward their destination. Amara's hands trembled as she clasped the envelope to her chest. The station announcement blared over the speakers, and she realized she had to move. She gently scooped up Lila and stood, trying to steady herself. Her mind raced with possibilities. $200 could keep them safe for weeks. She thought of how she would catch up on rent, or maybe find a small daycare so Lila could sleep safely without her in the mornings. As she made her way off the train, she felt a surge of purpose. The world seemed brighter. The weight on her shoulders eased. The strangers on the platform bustled by, unaware of the quiet miracle that had happened on the train. Amara held her baby close, turning once to look back at the doors that had closed, behind the generous stranger. She whispered a prayer of thanks and stepped into the station, her footsteps lighter than before. Outside, the city hummed with activity. Vendors setting up stands, children hurrying to school, and buses barreling down the streets. Amara pushed the stroller through the crowd, the envelope safely tucked away. She felt a new sense of hope, imagining a future where she no longer had to worry about each passing moment. For now, she would focus on the day ahead, working to earn enough for tomorrow, knowing that someone somewhere had believed in her and her daughter just by watching them sleep. Amara stepped off the bus and felt the warm sun on her face as she held Lila close. She walked toward the small apartment she shared with her daughter, her steps steady even though her heart pounded from both excitement and relief. She clutched the envelope in her bag, careful not to let its contents slip or fall. The envelope felt heavier now, filled not just with bills but with hope. Each payment inside represented a promise of safety, a break from the everyday worry that had filled Amara's mind for as long as she could remember. Inside their apartment, Amara laid the envelope on the chipped wooden table and took a deep breath. She held Lila on her hip, rocking her gently as she opened a refrigerator that carried only a few leftovers and a nearly empty milk carton. The baby cooed softly and batted at the air, oblivious to the tension that had haunted her mother's life. Amara watched her daughter, marveling at how quickly babies could grow and change. Just 6 months old, Lila already showed curiosity in her wide eyes and the way she reached for stray strands of her mother's hair. Amara folded the bills, carefully, and counted them twice. $200. For a moment, she simply sat at the table, letting the realization sink in. $200 might mean 1 month's rent, or it could become a deposit for a daycare center that might give Lila a safer space to sleep. She could use part of it for groceries, making sure they had food to stretch across the next weeks. She felt a strange mix of caution and excitement, as if she were handling something fragile. This money, gifted by a stranger, could change everything, but only if she used it wisely. First, she decided to pay the rent. This month, she had fallen almost $100 behind, and the landlord had sent a polite note reminding her that the rent was overdue. Amara gathered the money and wrote a check, praying that her landlord would accept it without charging extra fees. She walked downhill to the leasing office, the hot pavement beneath her feet reminding her that summer had arrived early. At the office door, she felt her stomach twist with nervousness. When she handed the check to the landlord's assistant, the older woman studied it, then smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Amara," she said kindly. "You're all set for this month." Amara exhaled a shaky breath and thanked the woman. As she left, the weight on her chest lifted a little. She felt lighter, as if a storm cloud had moved on. With the rent covered, she still had enough money left to look for daycare. She had heard of a small center on Elm Street, run by a neighbor, named Mrs. Ortiz, who cared for children of single parents for a modest fee. The center's reputation was good. It offered a safe place for babies to nap and provided simple meals. If she could enroll Lila there, Amara would be able to work knowing her daughter was protected. She arrived at Mrs. Ortiz's home, a small house with a white picket fence and a garden of marigolds and daisies. Inside, a few toddlers played on a colorful rug while a helper prepared bottles in the corner. Mrs. Ortiz, a warm woman in her 50s with a gentle smile, welcomed Amara and Lila. "Come in, dear," she said, patting the couch. Lila reached out to touch a plush elephant toy as Amara explained her situation. How she needed a place where Lila could nap without being woken by other children. How she worked long hours in the mornings and needed someone she could trust. Mrs. Ortiz nodded, listening carefully. "I have a spot open," she said after a moment. "It's not fancy, but it's safe. We feed them healthy snacks and they rest in cushioned cribs. I know how hard it is for single moms." She gave Amara a form to fill out and a schedule of payments. Amara noticed with relief that the monthly fee fit well within what remained of the gifted money, and she would only need to pay a small extra each week once her regular wages arrived. She filled out the form, her hand steady despite a fluttering feeling of nerves. After signing, she kissed Lila on the forehead. "Tomorrow is the first day," Mrs. Ortiz said, leading them to a room where soft music drifted from a small speaker. "She'll sleep in that crib there. You can drop her off at 7:30 and pick her up at 2 If you need overtime, let me know." Amara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This means everything." Mrs. Ortiz patted her shoulder and handed her a small pink card with a schedule written in neat letters. Carrying Lila, Amara left and headed back to the apartment. She thought of the stranger on the train who had given her that envelope, and he did not know his name or why he had chosen to help her and Lila. How he noticed their tired faces, how he reached into his briefcase without hesitation. She wondered if he always carried extra money for moments like this, or if something about her had touched him deeply. She did not have answers, but she felt grateful enough for both herself and her daughter. Back at home, Amara placed the transit card from the envelope next to the old phone on the table. Her current card had a balance barely enough for 2 more trips. With this new card, she would be able to commute to work and to school if she decided to go back. For years, she had wanted to finish her GED, but she never felt she had enough time or money. Now, she thought, maybe she could pay for the classes too. She could complete her studies at night while working during the day, and one day she might find a better job, perhaps as an administrative assistant at the nonprofit office she dreamed of joining. That evening, Amara prepared dinner for herself and Lila, cooking rice, beans, and a small side of vegetables. She sat at the table watching her daughter chew a soft piece of banana, her face lit by the glow of a table lamp. The apartment felt quieter than usual. Without the constant dread of paying rent late or running out of formula, Amara breathed more easily. She thought of her mother's medical bills, still looming, and knew she did not have enough left to help her yet. But at least this month, she would not have to choose between rent and medicine. After cleaning up, Amara searched her bag for the small notebook where she kept notes about her dreams. She flipped through pages filled with neat, small handwriting, ideas for short stories about her childhood, observations of life in her neighborhood, and plans for how she could improve her future. She had always loved to write, but had set aside her dreams long ago. On the last page, she scribbled a sentence about hope. A single act of kindness can change everything. She closed the notebook and looked at Lila, now drowsy and rubbing her eyes. Amara carried her to the bed, pulled a thin blanket over her, and watched her sleep. Lila slept deeply, breathing evenly in her crib. Amara knelt beside the bed and whispered, "Mama loves you, baby. We'll be okay." She kissed the top of Lila's head and turned off the light. Standing in the darkness, she let the quiet surround her for a few moments. She felt a determination kindling in her chest, to work hard, to learn new skills, and to create a better life not only for Lila but for herself. She would remember the kindness of the stranger who had helped her, and one day she would pay it forward. The next morning, Amara woke before dawn again, though this time, she did not feel the same crushing weight of fear. She dressed quickly, bundled Lila into her stroller and checked the clock. At 7:30, she walked to Elm Street and pushed open the gate to Mrs. Ortiz's house. Lila reached up to wave goodbye, and Amara smiled, feeling a flutter of pride. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart," she said, and Mrs. Ortiz guided Lila inside, humming a soft lullaby. Amara watched through the window until she could no longer see her daughter's bright eyes. With the baby safe, Amara hurried to the bus stop, paid for her fare with the new transit card, and settled onto the seat. She thought of the man she had called Sir on the train, and how he had given her the freedom to breathe. Now she had 2 jobs, her cleaning shift and a part-time evening position at a small cafe that paid $15 an hour. She would work there 3 nights a week after spending her afternoons studying at the local library. The thought of studying made her heart race, but it was a good kind of excitement. On the train, Amara closed her eyes briefly as it rattled forward. She remembered how a few days ago she might have fallen asleep sitting up, head lolling against a stranger's shoulder. Now, instead of fear or shame, she felt gratitude and courage. As the city passed by outside the window, brick buildings, fluttering signs, and the occasional stretch of green, Amara imagined a future where she walked into a classroom, diploma in hand, and told her story to a teacher who nodded in understanding. She imagined herself typing on a computer in an office somewhere safe and warm, her daughter playing in a nursery nearby. She arrived at the office building where she worked as a cleaner and began her shift. As she pushed her cart quietly through empty halls, she thought of how each small task, each wiped desk and polished floor, brought her closer to her dreams. Every dollar she earned, she would save a little, and someday, she would look back on this moment as the day her life turned. Through it all, she would remember to be kind, because a brief moment of compassion on a crowded train had set her on a new path, one filled with promise, hope, and the possibility of a better tomorrow. Amara's alarm buzzed at 5:45 a.m., pulling her from a dream where she and Lila lived in a small house with a backyard full of flowers. She lay still for a moment, savoring the memory of sunlight on her face, before swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic drifting through the thin walls. She dressed quickly in the dark. Jeans, a simple blouse, and an old cardigan that smelled faintly of lavender. She tiptoed to Lila's crib and lifted her daughter gently, careful not to wake her fully. By 6 a.m., Amara had bundled Lila into her stroller and headed for the bus stop. The morning air felt cool against her cheeks, a pleasant contrast to the heat that would come later. At Mrs. Ortiz's daycare, she kissed Lila on the forehead and watched her toddle toward a small group of children playing with blocks. Lila turned and waved, and Amara felt a pang of pride. "Be good, baby," she whispered, then slipped out the door before tears could cloud her vision. At 7 a.m., Amara arrived at the cafe where she worked 3 evenings a week. It was still before dawn, so the only sounds were the soft clink of coffee cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. She donned an apron and tied her hair back, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves. Today, she would finish her GED practice test after her shift, squeezing in study time whenever she could. Her coworker Maria smiled and handed her a mug of coffee. "You okay, Amara?" she asked softly. Amara nodded and took a sip, grateful for the warmth. Morning customers trickled in, a delivery driver in a stained uniform, a young woman with earbuds nodding to music, and a businessman who ordered a black coffee. Amara moved behind the counter, with practiced ease, steaming milk, filling pastries into paper bags, and chatting briefly with regulars. At 8:30 a.m., her shift ended. She wiped down the counters and placed a note on the register. Back at 3 p.m. The cafe's doors closed behind her as she stepped into brighter light, grabbing her backpack from a hook. Next, Amara headed to the public library, where the GED class met at 9 a.m. The building smelled of old books and polished wood. She found a seat near the front, next to a young man named Carlos who was studying for a welding certification. Their teacher, Ms. Patel, greeted everyone with a warm smile and passed out math worksheets. Amara pulled out her pencil and workbook, determined to master fractions before the next exam. As the lesson began, she felt her mind sharpen, the numbers on the page becoming part of a puzzle she wanted to solve. At noon, the class ended. Amara tucked away her notes and packed her bag, wheeling her way toward the bus stop for the ride back to Mrs. Ortiz's. Along the way, she thought about how far she had come in just a few weeks, from fear of eviction to paying rent, from uncertainty to a schedule that included work, study, and childcare. She felt tired, yes, but also energized by small victories, like solving a tricky math problem or seeing Lila thrive in a safe space. Back at home, Amara unpacked groceries, rice, beans, a loaf of bread, and a few cans of soup. She hummed a simple tune as she prepared lunch, chopping vegetables and stirring a pot on the stove. Leela sat in her high chair, babbling and banging a wooden spoon on the table. Amara smiled at her daughter's joy, then plated a small portion of food and fed her carefully, making sure she tasted each new flavor. Mealtimes were moments of peace in Amara's life. No worries about bills or schedules, just her and Lila sharing a hot meal together. In the afternoon, after a quick nap, for Lila, Amara headed to the Community Resource Center to volunteer. The center was a modest brick building with a colorful mural painted on one wall, showing hands reaching out to help each other. Inside, volunteer coordinator Ms. Green greeted her. "Thanks for coming by, Amara," she said, handing her a clipboard. "We need help sorting donations, diapers, formula, clothes, toys." Amara spent the next 2 hours folding clothes, labeling boxes, and chatting with other volunteers. Many of them were single parents who reminded her of herself. One volunteer, Jasmine, a mother of 3, paused to talk while stacking blankets. "When I first came here, I didn't know how I'd survive," she said quietly. "But people helped. Me like you are helping now. Keep going, you'll get there." Amara nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She squeezed Jasmine's hand and returned to the boxes, thinking about how she might one day help someone just like her. In those moments, she felt part of a community, no longer alone. The late afternoon light turned golden as Amara left the resource center. She collected Lila from Mrs. Ortiz's house. Lila greeted her with a big grin and clapped her hands. "Mama," she babbled, and Amara scooped her up, inhaling her sweet baby scent. They walked home slowly, Lila pointing out things she noticed along the way: a bird perched on a lamppost, a neighbor watering flowers. Amara watched her daughter's wonder and felt a warm glow in her chest. Evening fell, and Amara changed into her work clothes again. At 6 p.m., she returned to the cafe, which was busier now with after-work crowds. The cafe glowed with warm light, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Amara moved from table to table, taking orders, carrying mugs of hot chocolate, topped with whipped cream, and smiling as she greeted familiar faces. She felt a sense of purpose in each task. This job paid for her classes and kept food on their table. After her shift ended at 9 p.m., Amara cleaned one last table and closed the register. She sank into a chair for a moment, letting her muscles relax. Her feet ached and her back felt stiff, but she felt proud. She had balanced 3 jobs, GED classes and childcare all in one day, and still found time to volunteer. She thought about the stranger on the train who had started this journey with his unexpected generosity. He had given her more than money. He had given her a belief in kindness and in her own worth. At home, Amara made a simple supper, leftovers warmed in a pan, and sat with Lila in her lap as her daughter nibbled on soft bits of rice. Afterward, she brushed Lila's hair, sang a lullaby, and tucked her into bed. Lila drifted to sleep quickly, her chest rising and falling in gentle rhythm. Amara knelt beside the crib and whispered, "You're my light, baby." She kissed Lila's forehead and turned off the lamp, leaving the room in soft darkness. She returned to the kitchen, pulled out her notebook, and wrote, "Volunteering today reminded me that kindness is a circle. When you give, you receive hope in return." She paused, thinking of ways to expand her volunteer work, perhaps hosting a small support group for young mothers at the center. She scribbled ideas: storytelling nights, tutoring sessions, diaper drives. She closed the notebook and placed it on the table. As she prepared for bed, a knock sounded at the door. Startled, she opened the peephole and saw a man in a suit handing an envelope through the slot. She yanked the door open. "Sir?" she said, surprised. He smiled gently. "I manage the community fund for the plaza where your office is. We've started a small transportation voucher program for single parents. I believe this is for you." He held out an envelope. Inside, she discovered 3 bus passes and a note: "For your trips to school and work. Keep going." Amara felt her world shift again. She blinked back tears as she folded the note carefully. "Thank you," she whispered. The man nodded and walked away into the night, disappearing before she could ask his name. She closed the door and leaned against it, clutching the envelope to her heart. The extra passes meant she could spend less from her own pocket, stretching her time and money even further. Later, as Amara lay in bed, she thought of how far she had come since the morning she fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder. Now, through her hard work and the kindness of others, she saw a path forward, one that led to her GED graduation, a steady job, and perhaps a small home where she and Lila could grow without worry. The road ahead was still long, but each sunrise brought new possibilities. And in the quiet dark of her apartment, Amara whispered a promise to herself: "I will pay this kindness forward one day at a time." Amara woke early once more, though her mornings no longer felt like a burden. The sun peeked through her window as she dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, feeling a sense of calm she had not known before. Today was important. It was the day of her GED exam. She checked on Lila, who was still asleep in her crib, breathing softly. Amara smiled and tiptoed back to her own room to review her notes one last time. She remembered the first days of studying, when even basic fractions seemed confusing, and now she felt ready to tackle the final test. After gently waking Lila and feeding her a small breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, Amara dressed her daughter in a bright yellow dress with tiny daisies printed on it. Lila's face lit up at the color, and she giggled as Amara tied a small bow in her hair. Amara felt a surge of hope as she kissed Lila's forehead and whispered, "Today is important, sweetie." Mrs. Ortiz's daycare arranged to take Lila early, so Amara would not miss the start of her exam at the community college. As she left, she felt both excitement and a familiar flutter of nerves. The community college building smelled of fresh paint and polished floors. Bright posters lined the hallways, encouraging students to believe in themselves. Amara found the room where the exam would take place. Other students filled the seats, some chatting quietly, others flipping through last-minute review sheets. Amara took a deep breath and reminded herself how far she had come. Just months ago, she had feared she would never complete school. Now she sat at a desk with a pencil in her hand, ready to show what she knew. As the exam began, Amara worked steadily, recalling each lesson from Ms. Patel's class. Math problems that had once seemed intimidating now felt like puzzles she could solve. The reading comprehension section flowed smoothly, and she remembered the strategies she had practiced for understanding long passages. When she reached the writing portion, she wrote confidently about her experience growing up and the challenges she had faced. She described the moment on the train when a stranger's act of kindness gave her hope, explaining how it inspired her to work hard for herself and for Lila. 2 hours later, the exam ended. Amara handed in her paper and stepped outside into a warm breeze, her mind buzzing with relief and anticipation. She felt as though she were stepping into a new era of her life. The months of late-night studying, long workdays, and juggling responsibilities seemed distant now. She allowed herself a moment to imagine walking across a graduation stage, receiving a diploma, and telling her daughter that anything was possible if one worked hard enough. On the bus ride home, Amara replayed her answers in her mind and felt proud. She thought of the strangers who had helped her along the way. The man on the train who gave her money without asking questions, the community fund manager who delivered bus passes, and the volunteers at the resource center who treated her with respect and kindness. She realized that each act of compassion had built a foundation for her success. By the time the bus reached Elm Street, Amara felt a lightness in her chest she had not felt in years. When she arrived at Mrs. Ortiz's, Lila ran to meet her with open arms. Amara hugged her daughter tightly, sensing that Lila understood this day was special. Mrs. Ortiz smiled and said, "I know you did wonderful today." Amara nodded, tears of joy brimming in her eyes. She paid for Lila's day and carried her home, feeling confident that soon she would have more opportunities to provide a stable life. That evening, after preparing a simple dinner of rice, beans, and vegetables, Amara returned to her notebook and recorded her feelings. "Today I finished a chapter of my life. I am no longer defined by my struggles, but by my determination." She placed the notebook on the table and looked at Lila, who ate quietly, her eyes wide and curious. Amara felt a deep sense of gratitude for the love she saw in her daughter's face. Lila represented both her reasons to work hard and the promise of a brighter future. Weeks passed and the day of her GED results arrived. Amara sat at her kitchen table, heart pounding as she opened the envelope. She read the words over and over. "Congratulations, you have passed." Tears filled her eyes as she called Mrs. Patel and Ms. Green to share the news. They celebrated with her over the phone, their voices warm with pride. Amara felt as though she had climbed a mountain. The view from the top revealed possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine before. To celebrate, Amara took Lila to a small park near their apartment. The sun shone on the swings and slides, and children's laughter filled the air. Amara sat on a bench watching Lila play in the sandbox, and allowed herself to feel joy without guilt. She thought of her mother's illness and her siblings back home, knowing that soon she might be able to help them in more meaningful ways. She felt confident that her life was moving forward. With her GED in hand, Amara applied for an administrative assistant position at a local nonprofit organization that helped families in need. The interview panel listened as she spoke about her dedication, her resilience, and her passion for giving back. She told them how volunteering at the resource center had awakened her desire to help others, and how her own experiences gave her insight into the challenges faced by vulnerable families. A few days later, she received a call offering her the job. She felt as if she were dreaming, a steady paycheck, benefits, and a supportive team waiting for her. Her first day at the nonprofit office was filled with introductions and tours. She met her coworkers, many of whom had stories of their own struggles. They welcomed her warmly and showed her how the organization supported families through food drives, educational programs, and job training. Amara felt at home among people who understood the importance of compassion. She worked diligently, answering calls, organizing files, and helping plan events. Each task reminded her that she was part of something bigger, a network of care that reached those who needed it most. As months passed, Amara's life took on a steady rhythm. She dropped Lila at daycare, commuted to the nonprofit office on the bus passes she had been given, and spent evenings reading with her daughter. Lila learned new words each day and greeted each sunrise with a smile. Amara found a small apartment with a backyard where Lila could play safely. She decorated the walls with colorful pictures and hung curtains that let in soft morning light. For the first time, she felt a sense of permanence. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Rhodes continued his work as a technology CEO, but his experiences on that, trained in the stories he heard from his company's new community programs, led him to deepen his commitment to social impact. He joined nonprofit boards, helped expand the transportation voucher program to more cities, and spoke publicly about the importance of giving back. Though he never knew Amara's name, he learned from her story, shared by colleagues at the Community Fund, that a simple gesture could transform lives. He began to mentor other business leaders, encouraging them to look beyond bottom lines to the people in their communities. Occasionally, Amara's thoughts returned to the stranger who had first helped her, and she wondered if he would ever know the full impact of his kindness. She knew his gift had been the spark that ignited her determination to pursue education and build a stable life for her daughter. She vowed that one day she would pass along that same kindness to someone else who needed hope. She began mentoring young mothers at the resource center, sharing her story and guiding them through the steps she had taken, finding childcare, applying for classes, and seeking support when needed. One late afternoon, as she organized a volunteer event at the B Center, a young mother named Nina approached her with wide eyes. Nina held her baby tightly and asked, "How did you find the courage to keep going?" Amara knelt beside her and smiled. "Someone believed in me," she said softly. "It was a small act, but it meant the world. Now I want to help you believe in yourself." She gave Nina information about GED classes and told her about the clinic that provided free counseling. In that moment, Amara understood that her life had come full circle. A stranger's kindness had set her on a path, and now she could light the way for others. Years later, Amara stood at a podium in a small auditorium, dressed in a modest suit, holding her daughter's hand. Lila, now 10 years old, looked proud as her mother accepted an award from the nonprofit for her service and leadership. The audience of families, volunteers, and colleagues applauded, and Amara felt tears of gratitude fill her eyes. She thought of her younger self, the exhausted mother on a crowded bus, and realized how much had changed. She thanked her family, the volunteers, and the community for their support, saying, "One small act of kindness changed my life. I am here because someone believed in me, and now I hope I can give that belief to others." After the ceremony, as people lined up to congratulate her, Amara saw a man in a suit standing off to the side. Their eyes met for a moment, and she recognized the kindness in his gaze, though she could not place his face exactly. The man nodded gently, stepping forward to shake her hand. "Your story moved me," he said in a familiar, calm voice. "Thank you for paying it forward." Amara felt a rush of recognition and looked more closely. His presence reminded her of that day on the train, but she hesitated, unsure if it was the same man. Before she could ask, he smiled and melted back into the crowd, leaving her with a heart full of wonder.